In April of 1987, headlines were made when Princess Diana of Wales visited a hospital where there were AIDS patients. Perhaps her visit to the hospital would not have made headlines in itself. But she visited the hospital, went to the ward where there were AIDS patients, and she sat down with them, she talked with them, and she did one other thing that caused the headlines. Do you know? She touched them without gloves. She touched them without gloves. That caused headlines around the world. A princess touched AIDS patients without using gloves, which was still standard protocol in any setting where AIDS patients were treated. This is 1987. It was in 1986 when President Ronald Reagan mentioned for the first time publicly the word AIDS. This is still very early in those first years when so little was understood and so much was misunderstood about the illness. AIDS has been in many respects a kind of modern day leprosy. There has been so much misunderstood about the disease, so much now that we know in attempting to understand it better. And for so long, the common theory was, one never knows, so best to wear gloves. Jesus lived long before the days of Germ-X. I was thinking about my Germ-X this week, and at the end of the week, I just took a moment to walk around my house, and look what I found. Germ-X for the car. Germ-X from Felipe's room. I'll give it back to you later. Germ-X, look at the little one, even for the 4-year-old. There's a little antibacterial. This one's from my purse, and this one's from the office. This took me about a minute and a half to come up with this many Germ-X bottles. Maybe some of you were thinking, oh, I hope she doesn't go through my purse. Mine's about 16 in there. And actually, I'm not a germaphobe at all. My husband knows. I'll let food fall to the floor and pick it right back up and eat it. So this comes from, shake your head. I'm like, yeah. This comes from someone who just kind of, sort of, sometimes thinks about cleaning her hands. Not really. Especially before communion, I promise. We live in a Germ-X world, and with the gloves, the kids did a good job putting them on today. Jesus didn't. I'm quite certain there was no Germ-X. But Jesus lived in a world where people were germ-conscious. Sometimes for the same reasons we are. There are illnesses that one can give to another by touching them, coughing on them, and all kinds of other ways. In many respects, that hasn't changed. But Jesus also knew that he was living in a world where people were conscious of a different kind of germ, let's say. A different kind of sharing. He found that people tended to put on their gloves and sanitize their hands and their hearts and their minds. When it came to thinking about breaking down some of the divisions that had been set in place for a long time. Those who kept proper laws and those who didn't. Those who were considered righteous and those who were considered sinners. Those who were well, and those who were ill. Those who came from particular families, and those who came from other particular families. He found that people tended to put their gloves on and sanitize their hands, trying to prevent the possibility of a breakdown between those traditional divisions. Well, that's where we find ourselves today when we see the roof come caving in. Jesus has already been enmeshed in some of these conversations. He knows who's out there. He knows who's listening to him. And here we find Jesus surrounded by crowds of people, and then the roof starts to cave in. I mean, if you just think for a moment what it must have been like to be there, listening to Jesus, and then things start falling from the sky, and all of a sudden you can see the sun coming in, and then it's just a man. It's just a man coming in from the sky. And I'm wondering how many people there thought, hey, that's cutting in line. I mean, really? The crowds are supposed to keep people at bay and wait your turn. We've been here all day. So you're coming in through the roof. Try that next time you're at a store and you want to get to the front of the line. Go in through the roof and say, Jesus told me to do it. See, it's right here in Mark 2. A man comes in through the roof. And all of a sudden, the scribes, the leaders, the ones most knowledgeable about the faith, have their Germex. Like, we're ready for this one. We're ready for this one. Get the sanitizer on. Clearly, this man is not one of us. Clearly. And of course, they're waiting to see if Jesus takes a squirt or not. If Jesus has his gloves on, what will he do? He's caught, isn't he? Jesus is caught with his gloves off. Here, the scribes find themselves in a very blurry situation. They're on glove patrol. They don't just wear their own gloves, attempting to keep religious practices intact, attempting to keep what has become protocol and law for many, many years intact. And I'm sure a little portion of keeping their power intact as well. Not only have they got their own gloves on, but they're checking to see who else is wearing theirs. And already in Mark's Gospel, we've seen places where Jesus has taken the gloves off, and they don't like that. Healing on the Sabbath, can't do that. Put your gloves back on. Touching people he's not supposed to touch, can't do that. Put your gloves back on. And they're always there to remind him. And here, once again, they're there on glove patrol, waiting. Who says you can say that? Don't say that.